This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, so hi and hello everyone. Very good morning. And I believe like I'm audible clearly and my screen is also visible. If any issues are there, please let me know in my voice or my screen. So yeah, I think we are good. So yesterday we have seen about APIs. Like yesterday was a demo session and we have seen about what exactly an API is. So we'll just have a quick recap on what we have seen yesterday. What is an API? So we have seen that API stands for the application programming interface, and it's basically acts as a bridge between two software applications. These two softwares can be anything, whether it could be to mobiles, to web apps, or like one app, one server. So basically, whenever we are having a bridge between two applications, it is known as API. And this API is used to transfer some data. So whenever the data is being transferred to another application, that data is known as request. Like we are sending some request, and based on that request, we're getting some response. Okay. Well, we are going to learn about request and response very briefly in the further sessions. But as of now, I just given you a little bit of examples of that. Now we've also seen that why API testing is required, or like what are the advantages of API testing. So basically, if we are testing the APIs, it has a faster executions because we don't have any UI. If there is an UI, then data will take some time to load in the UI. But in case of APIs, we don't have any kind of animations, or we don't have any kind of UI. That's why the execution is faster. Bug detection is earlier because usually the API are built before the UI part. So if someone is testing the API, he can detect the bug in the early stage only. Better test coverage is there. We have seen that we can test various and like every possible functionality of an application. So that is also one advantage of doing the API testing. Cross language is there, where we can use multiple languages. Easy automation is there. So as I told you, like if we talk about automation, then the automation for API is more easy in comparison to UI. For example, in UI, you need to do a lot of logics, lot of setup is there. But in comparison to UI, or like mobile application automation, the API automation is more easy. So for doing the automation of APIs, we probably use Postman, REST Assured, or Python request library. So REST Assured is basically used with Java, and request is a substitute of REST Assured. When you are doing the automation of API using request, or like using Python, it is known as request. And Postman is at the top of the all. Like it has its own language, JavaScript language, so we can make use of JavaScript language. So there is a component in JavaScript language which is known as chai assertions. Basically, those chai assertions are used to validate something. So we are going to use those things as well. We are going to see different test snippets, different test scripts, what we can do. A lot of things will be there. And the security testing, as I told you, like the security testing is one of the bigger reason to do the API testing, because anyone can interfere in your API in your system if they have the access of your API. So basically, in security testing, what we check the authentication, authorization, these things. We check that, okay, whether this API is secure or not, and whether it's asking for some particular token or username or password or not to get the access with that. We are also going to see this authentication, authorization, a lot of things is there. We are also going to see this in the further sessions, including MFA, basic auth, bearer token, and then basic, and then there's one, OAuth 2.0. So a lot of things are there. AWS is there. So we're also going to see that AWS signature actually. So a lot of things we'll be seeing how we can make use of that. So this was a very quick recap of what we have seen yesterday. Now let's move ahead very quickly. So basically, the API works on client server architecture. API works on client server architecture. What exactly this client server architecture is, I'll not make you confused by telling you the very technical terms. I'll just give you a very simple example. think of the client as a customer. So when you go to a shop as a customer, you are the client for him, to the shop owner, correct? So let's say that a customer is there in a shop who is a client. And what is a server? Server is basically the shop's storage room where all the all the stuffs or groceries are there. So that is basically server for us. Okay. So shop's storage room is server. Now, can you directly go to that storage room? Okay, let me just open this one. Yeah. So this is the client. So this is you, and this is the storage room. This is basically server, which contains all the groceries and everything. Now, can you directly go here and then yeah, can you directly get the groceries? No, you need to deal with the shopkeeper. You need to deal with the shopkeeper who is going, like you will request to him that okay, I want this particular thing, and then this shopkeeper will go to this storage room, correct, and he will take a particular thing, and then he will take that thing back to you, that grocery or whatever that is. So this is the request which we are sending, this is the response which we are getting. We are acting as a client, this storage room is acting as a server, and this shopkeeper is acting as an API. The shopkeeper is acting as an API. Coming back to my PPT, so think of a client as a customer in a shop, server as the shop's storage room, and the API is the counter or shopkeeper, whatever you say, where requests are made, and then items are handed over. Basically, these items are the response. So, in normal terms, what is a client? A client is someone who is asking for a service or data. Correct? So in our case, our mobile applications or web applications, these are clients. Now, what is a server? Server is basically which stores data. So that can be a server, database, anything. It could be anything. So basically, server stores the data. Usually, it is always a database. What is an API? API is basically the middleman that carries the request from client and take it to the server, and then it also take back this response to us. Now, what exactly is request? API take this client, they take this from client to server. So basically, whatever this API is taking from client and putting, like giving it to server, is a request, and whatever API is taking from server and giving back to us is a response. So I hope we are good with this client server architecture. And this client server architecture, it's not only applicable with the API. So I hope that you guys have heard about mobile automation, like mobile automation. So to do mobile automation, there is a tool which is known as Appium. So Appium is a tool using which we can do the mobile automation. And that Appium is also based on this client server architecture. That Appium is also based on this client server architecture. Okay. So this is the basic fundamentals of a client server architecture. Moving ahead, I have already shown you like why API testing is required. As we have seen that it's time effective because the execution is faster. It's language independent. As I told you, multiple languages can be used there. Okay, and API testing help us to foresee and reduce the risk of the system. So basically, we can priorly detect the bugs. Right. So a lot of, like, we have already discussed this thing, and this is the client server structure, what I have already shown you. Like basically how the API works. This is our client. It could be mobile or desktop. And then there's a middleman, which is API, which is taking your request to the server, which is basically a database. And then again, that middleman is taking your response back to the client. Again, this API, this middleman API is taking your response back to the desktop. So this is all about the what exactly API is and how it works. Now we'll just move to more things. So what is the difference between API and web services? So we need to understand it very clearly. What is an API? What is a web service? I'll just come back here again. So API and web service both are the same things. Nothing different. API services both are the same things. API also takes the request, give it to database, and come back to the client with a response. Web service is also a kind of API, which takes the request, give it to database, come back to the client with a response. Then what is the difference? The difference is API can talk between two applications with or without internet. So basically the internet is not required if you're working with API. So as I told you, let's assume that if there are two applications in my system. Let's assume that if there are two applications in my system, and one application can communicate with the another application. It means there is an API, because to communicate with these two applications, we don't require internet. It's in my system only. And also in the further sessions, we're also going to create our own API. We are going to create our own API, which will be in this system only locally, and then we will be also getting the response without internet. Without internet, we will be doing that. So that is basically API. Coming to the definition and explanation part, API is a set of rules that allows two applications to talk to each other with or without internet. APIs can be used inside the same application or between two different applications or over the internet as well. As I told you, internet may be required, may not be required. It means it can be local or remote. So whenever if someone is talking about API, it means you're not sure whether it requires the internet or not. But like in most of the cases, internet is required. We all know that. And if I will talk about the example, so in my laptop's file system, so I have a laptop file system, correct? In my system, we all have file explorer. So there our API lets a program to create or read files, correct? So there's an API. There's an API in my file system which is allowing me to read the files, or I can create a file, or I can create a folder. That API is doing so, correct? So obviously if I don't have internet, still I am able to do so. That's why API works with or without internet. But web service is a type of API that only works over the internet, using the HTTP. Now what exactly this HTTP is? We are also going to see this HTTP in brief in the further sessions. Right now, just understand that this HTTP is required to work with the web services, because if anything you are sending the request or getting back the response, it can be done with the help of HTTP only. Okay, you can say like it's a kind of a car over the bridge, or like your legs over the bridge. Without leg or without car, you can't go from a point of a bridge to another point. So that's why this is a carrier. Actually, HTTP is a kind of carrier. It's required. And the response are always fetched remotely, because obviously if we are working with the internet, then the response will be coming from remote destinations, okay, and to our client. For example, if I'm if I'm checking for any flight details in my Ixigo application, obviously it's fetching that flight prices, or availability, seat availability, everything from that airline server. How? With the help of HTTP, with the help of internet. If there is no internet, you cannot get the data of how many seats are available in the airline. So again, saying it in a quick way, API requires or may not require the internet, but web services always require the internet. This is the only difference between API and web services. Coming to this note, so it says all web services are API. Obviously, all the web services are API because they are using internet. But not all APIs are web services. We can't say that okay, because some of the APIs are working without internet as well. Correct? Some APIs are working without internet as well. So that could not be considered as a web service. So this is one more important thing. Obviously, API is a bigger concept and web services is a special case of it, or you can say a part of it, a part of API. So we are good with that as well. We can move to the another topic. Now, basically, there are three major types of APIs. There are three major types of APIs. Like there are a lot of APIs, a lot of kind of APIs, but right now in the market, as per the current industry, there are three major type of APIs. The first API is REST, second API is SOAP, third API is GraphQL. Obviously, all these APIs do the same work. All these APIs are going to take the request from the client, give it to the server, take the response from the server, give it to the client back. Correct? So all these APIs are doing the same thing. But there is a very much little bit of difference, among these three things. What we are going to see there. And one more thing, this course is purely based for REST APIs, okay? Because in the market right now, 80% of the market is captured by REST APIs. 80% of the market is captured by the REST APIs. SOAP APIs are not now used in most of the industries. Still, there are some industries which are using SOAP API, but it's a very old version of APIs. And GraphQL, it's a new kind of API which has been introduced by Meta and which is being used in some of the companies as well. Okay, so basically, like 3 years ago, I was working with PepsiCo. So PepsiCo was also using these GraphQL APIs, and we were testing the GraphQL APIs actually with the help of Cypress automation tool. So basically, like GraphQL APIs are also very good right now and capturing the market very quickly. But this course is intended to the REST APIs. Okay, moving ahead. What exactly is a REST API? If we talk about the full form, the REST API stands for representational state transfer. So, what is the method which is used by this API to transfer the request or response? What is the method? Usually, these APIs are using HTTP method. As I told you, HTTP is a kind of carrier. So if you want to go across a bridge from one point to another point, you require your legs or a bicycle or a bike or like car. In the same way, this HTTP is a kind of carrier which is required. And without this HTTP, your API can't go from this point of bridge to that point of bridge. Okay. So always remember REST APIs only uses HTTP. REST APIs only uses HTTP. Okay. So again, full form is this one and the method uses this one. Okay. HTTP methods. Coming to this data format. So basically look, if you are giving some data, so in which format you are giving the data and in which format you are getting the data. This is one more major thing, correct? Usually we provide the data in JSON format. Now what exactly the JSON format is? Let me show you. I'll just quickly open the notepad. So if someone is not knowing about JSON format, let me show you. So basically JSON format is a kind of, we need to have the curly braces, and then the JSON format will always be in the key value pair. What it means about key value pair? Like this. Name, and then name will be Dilip Kumar. Again, if you want to add one more data here, just add a comma, and then again age, and then what could be age is 41. And then if you want to again add more one data, let's have profession. And what could be the profession is QA director. So something like that. This is basically called a JSON format. Always make sure that whenever it's your last entry, we don't require the comma again. If you're giving the comma with the last entry, it will throw an error to you. Okay. So for the last entry, we don't require the comma. This is basically the JSON format. So we provide the request in this particular JSON format. Okay. We are going to see more things with, like related to JSON as well. So no need to worry about that. Sometimes the XML format is also used, but it's a very, very low chance that you are going to use the XML format. Okay. But I'll show you that how exactly XML formats also look like. Okay. So this was the data format which we usually use for the transfer of the, for transferring the request and response. And what are the key features for this REST APIs? The REST APIs are easy to understand. The REST APIs are used and widely adopted. So basically, like in most of the companies, the REST APIs are being used right now. As I told you, 70 to 80% market is being captured by REST APIs only. And this course is for that only. Now, right now, as I told you, like the most of the big companies are using REST APIs. So right now it's being used with the big companies like Instagram, Amazon, Google Maps. So all these companies are using REST APIs as of now. Okay. And yeah, this is an example. So this is an example of request and this is an example of response. Maybe if someone is purely new to the API part, they might not be able to understand this thing, but have faith in me. In the further sessions, we are going to explain each and everything. What is this HTTPS? What exactly this thing? What is this users? What is this five doing here? Everything we are going to understand in the in brief. Okay. But as of now, for now, just understand that this is a request which is particularly asking to this particular server that I want the detail of a user whose ID is 5. Just understand this thing for now. Just understand this thing for now, and in future, in future sessions, we are going to elaborate it more. So basically, the API is asking to this particular server that I want the detail of a user whose ID is 5, and then this is the response which you are going to get in your Postman. Obviously, like in the next session, we are going to install the Postman and we are going to see this thing practically. But right now, I'm just giving an overview. So what it will give the response as, like, okay, you have asked for the user detail of ID 5. Yeah, here it is. ID is 5, and the detail of user is like name is Rohit. So this is how the REST APIs works. Okay. One more thing, if you like, if there is some more details, if there is some more details for this user, like the name is there, let's say that there is occupation also, there is designation also, there is age also, all the details of that particular user will be coming up here in the response. This is REST API. REST API will fetch all the details of that particular user ID, all the details. But GraphQL is almost same as REST API, but it is not going to provide you all the details of that particular ID, because with the ID you will be also asking a particular key, that okay, I only want the name of that user with ID 5, or I only want the designation of the user with ID 5. So this is GraphQL, but we are going to understand it in more brief here. Okay, so as I told you, like, this PowerPoint contains everything. So yeah, this was all about REST API. I think like we are good with the REST API as well, and we'll be moving to SOAP API. Like, what exactly SOAP API is? What is the difference between REST APIs and SOAP APIs? Although we are not going to work with that, but I want you guys to have some some basic idea on SOAP API, because most of the times in the interviews they may ask you this question, like, what is the difference between REST API and SOAP API? So you need to know that. So if someone will ask you explain SOAP API, what you can do is, the full form is Simple Object Access Protocol. Basically, SOAP API, it stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. It's also a kind of API. The name is different and some working part is also different. I'll show you. So basically, the method used is HTTP or SMTP, or other protocols are there which are being used for the SOAP API. As I told you, for REST APIs, we are only going to use HTTP methods. But for SOAP APIs, HTTP, SMTP, or some other protocols are also there which can be used. Now, in REST APIs, we can use the JSON as well as XML. Okay, but for SOAP APIs, we can only use the XML format. For SOAP APIs, we can only use the XML format. And being frank, XML format is little bit complicated than JSON file. So you can see, this is the XML format. This is the XML format. But where is that notepad? Oh, okay, I think like I just deleted that. Oh, it's there. Yeah, this is the JSON format. Obviously, this is more user friendly, more readable, and more easy to understand. So this is the JSON format which we usually use in the which we can use in REST APIs. But for SOAP API, we can only use the XML format. Okay. Now, what is the key features? Like, what exactly this SOAP API has, like, due to which it was used? So basically, the SOAP API is more secure. So every API in this is having some encryption. So what it means about encryptions? What is the meaning of encryption? Whatever the data you are sending, or whatever the request you are sending, that request will get encrypted, and then it will go to server in the encrypted format only. So there is no any middle person who can read your data, who can read your request. For example, again, let me open that notepad. No, I will not close it because we require it every time. For example, in REST API, if you are sending this JSON file, then this same data will go to the server, like name as Dilip Kumar, age as 41, profession as QDAT. So this same data will be going to the server in the same format. Okay, but in SOAP APIs, this data will be encrypted format. This data will be in the encrypted format, and this actual data will not go to the server. There it will again get decrypted, and then it will get the like actual data, like what exactly you are asking for. But no any middle person, no any hacker, no any unethical hacker, they can't read your data. That's why SOAP API, are more secure. And right now, in some enterprise level applications, these APIs are being used, like banking, insurance, telecom. Why government APIs? Why? Because obviously these things should be more secure, correct? These things should be more secure, correct? So this is all about SOAP APIs, and this is an example of, this is the request example, this is the response example. So this is how it works, like, get user, and then you are passing user ID as 5. So what you are actually doing, you actually want the details of user with user ID 5, and what it's giving there in the response, it's giving in the response like this. Okay, you asked for the user response whose ID is 5. Yeah, okay, let's see, the name is Rohit. So this is giving you something like data, something like that. Obviously, this data and this data are almost same, but you see how much complicated it looks like. That's why REST APIs are more reliable, more easy to understand, more understandable. Okay. And then moving to GraphQL APIs. Like what exactly are GraphQL APIs? And why it came into the market? We were already having REST APIs, we were already having SOAP APIs. Why Meta created this GraphQL APIs? The thing is, whenever we were dealing with the REST APIs, for example, let's say that, again, my bad, not bad. For example, let's say that if you want the data, if you want, sorry, let's say that if you want the age of a person whose name is Dilip Kumar, what we will do? Or let's say one more thing, ID, and then let's say that ID is 5. Okay, ID is 5. Now, what you want? You want the details of a user whose ID is 5. So what you will do? You will send a request. You will send it. Now, how to send a request? We are going to see in the further sessions. Right now, I'm just, giving you an example of what exactly happens with the API. So you're going to send the request. Okay, that okay, give me the details of a user whose ID is 5. What REST API will do? It will provide you this whole detail. ID is 5, name is Dilip Kumar, age is 41, profession is QA director. Again, if you want only age of a user whose ID is 5, only age, you only want the age. And if you will use REST APIs, it is going to give you the whole data again. It will not only provide you the age, it will provide you everything, name, age, profession. If anything else is there, it will provide you that thing as well. But GraphQL APIs is something which will only provide you this specific data, which will only provide you sorry, the specific data. For example, in case of GraphQL API, if you're asking that, okay, just provide me the age of a user whose ID is 5, it will only provide you the age. It will not give you the unnecessary data. This is the beauty of GraphQL APIs, and being used with Meta. Currently, I practically experience with PepsiCo also. So these companies are also using GraphQL APIs right now. But I will not say that they are totally using it. They are just using this GraphQL APIs in some of their some of their modules or projects. That's it. So, for example, oh yeah, coming back to the explanation part. What is the full form of GraphQL APIs? Graph Query Language. Basically, this is GraphQL. Okay, GraphQL APIs. Again, it also works on the HTTP. It also works on HTTP method only. Okay, using a single endpoint. Using a single endpoint. So, what exactly an endpoint is? Again, you might be having a doubt. So, we are going to see everything in details. As I told you, this course is going to be a full-fledged course for you. And if you have this course, you don't need to go anywhere else. Then you don't need to go anywhere else. Then everything is covered in this course, in this PPT. Everything will be there. So yeah. So we are going to see this endpoint as well. So basically, these GraphQL APIs are also working with the HTTP, and the main thing is it will provide you the detail of a specific data. Okay, client send queries to ask for a specific data. Client means, obviously my mobile or laptop or anything. So they will be sending the queries to get the specific data, and you will get the specific data. What will be the data format? Basically, in GraphQL, the data format is, GraphQL, like whenever you are passing the request, it will be in the GraphQL syntax, which is a, different kind of syntax. Okay, not a JSON, not a XML. It's a different kind of syntax. But the response will always be in the JSON file. Not always be in the JSON file. You may get in the XML file also, but JSON is there for, most of the APIs. Key features. Obviously, it's flexible. Why it's flexible? Client decides exactly what data to get. So if you are using GraphQL APIs, you will get only that data which you want. No overfetching. You will not get any extra data. Okay. And why these applications are using, like Facebook, GitHub, Shopify, why these applications are using GraphQL? Because obviously they have a very complex kind of data with them, correct? If you have an account with Facebook, obviously Facebook not only stores your name, it has a lot of data about you, correct? Your name, age, work occupation, where do you live, address, friends, everything, photo, all, like a lot of things are there with Facebook. So if they will be using REST API, every time if they will be sending a request, they will be getting a huge data of a particular user, correct? And this is the reason they usually use GraphQL API, because they only want a particular data. And this is the request, like, get me the data of the user whose ID is 5. But what data I want? I don't want the full data. I only want the name and I only want the email. And this is what you will get, that okay, this is the data of that particular user which you are asking. The name is Rohit, the email is this one. So this was all about GraphQL APIs. I hope that we are pretty much clear with these three major type of APIs. So one is REST API, the another one is SOAP API, and the third one is GraphQL API. So we got understood about these APIs, correct? Now let's move to, some more advanced part of the APIs. Like now we are advancing our knowledge. We are expanding our knowledge now in terms of APIs. I hope that the way I'm making you guys understand everything very slowly, because as I told you, I'm assuming that most of you guys are not aware of the API. So I'm just, explaining you very deeply. I don't want in the further sessions that you guys are not able to understand the basic things, then it may create some issue for you. So I'll just go like that as of now. So yeah, now one more thing is there. Let me check one thing. Yeah, okay. So yeah, one more thing is there. Now we are going to see about some parts. What exactly HTTP? As I told you, like I will just explain you everything. What exactly this HTTP is? What is HTTPS? What is URL, URI, URL? So there is a lot of issues across the globe between URL and URI. A lot of issues. Like if you will just Google it, somewhere you will get the different definition for URL, somewhere you will get different definition for URI, somewhere it will say that both are the same thing. So a lot of things are there, but here you will get exactly what these URL and URI is. And URL is basically a different thing. Then what is a payload, what is an endpoint? So we are going to see everything. Now let's take an example. Let's take this example. So this is an URL. In our day-to-day terms, in our daily terms, we call this as URL, correct? Because it's a now common abbreviation for this thing. We call it as URL, but it's not like that. A lot of things are there. A lot of things are there. Let's see. This HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And what exactly this is? A protocol for communication between client and server. As I told you, it's a kind of carrier. It's a kind of carrier using which you can go from one end of a bridge to the another end of a bridge. So it's a kind of carrier. HTTP is a kind of carrier. Or in a simple language, HTTP is a protocol which is being used for the communication between client and server. So if you want to open a website, if you want to see the data of the website, obviously you need to send an API to that particular server. How? Using this HTTP only you can send the API to that server. Okay. So as I told you, data is sent. One more thing. If it is an HTTP, whatever the data you are sending, that will be sent in the plain text. that will be sent in the plain text, and it's not secure. It's not secure. But there is something relatable. HTTPS. The definition is same. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This S stands for secure. Means it is more secure. How? It is same as HTTP. It is also a carrier which is taking your request to the server, getting the response, taking back to your client. But what is the difference? The difference is whatever the data you are sending, that is not sent in the plain text. Now that data is secure. If you are sending your name as Dilip Kumar, Rohit Kumar, anything, the data which is going there is in the encrypted form. ABCD, XYZ, exclamatory mark, anything could be there. So your data is more secure in this HTTPS. Okay, and data is protected from the hackers during the transfer, obviously. So basically, whenever you guys are doing any kind of payments or anything, we use HTTPS so that no hackers can hack and empty your account. So this is basically HTTPS and HTTP. Now we are going to see these three things, and we will be seeing more clearly what is exactly is the difference among URI, URL, and URL. Basically, URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier, and this whole thing which we used to say as URL in a day-to-day language, we used to say this as an URL, correct? But actually this whole thing is not URL, this whole thing is URI. Okay, this whole thing is basically URI. But nowadays everyone is saying it as URL and URL. But this whole thing, a string that uniquely identifies a resource on the internet. Basically this is going to identify a resource on the internet, correct? Some like as of now, just ignore this resource and assume it as a data. Assume it as a data. This whole thing is going to get some data from the internet, correct? What that data is? Obviously, it's a weather data. So it's going to do like it's going to get the data of forecast in Delhi city for next 5 days. So the whole thing, the whole string which is going to get some data from the internet, that is known as URI. This whole thing is called URI. It's an umbrella term for both URL and URL. So yeah, obviously because URL and URL, these two things are part of URI. These two things are part of URI. Okay, that's why we say that yeah, it's an umbrella term. Now, for example, in this example, you can see in this example, the whole thing is a URI. This whole thing is the URI. Okay. Now, what is the URL? So the URL is if in simple words I'll tell you, just remove the URL. Just remove the URL. If what I can say is if any URI contains URL, just remove it. For example, let me just do one quickly, very quick thing. So it will more explain to you. So let's say that HTTPS, and then let's say HTTPS, and then say W, or no, not required, directly say like API dot google.com/home. Okay, this one you can say, or let me do one thing very quickly. Actually I have, okay, no, we will go with that. Yeah, so let's say that this thing is there. Now is this an URI, or is this an URL, or is this an URL? Look, this is an URI, this is an URI, but at the same time this is also an URL. At the same time, this is also an URL. Basically, URL contains the carrier, like you see HTTPS. URL contains the carrier, URL contains the server. So this is the server, and URL contains the exact location. Okay, carrier, server, and exact location. So this is also an URI. This is also an URL. But by any chance, if you have URN also here, if you have URN also here, now in this case, this whole thing is URI. Now till here, this is URL. This URL will not be considered under URL. Always make sure. Now till here, this is URL. Still it's URL, and this part is the URN. This part is the URN. Okay, now coming back to my PPT. So URL is the whole thing. URL is basically a part of URI which which specifies like where your data is, So this is where your data is. Okay, basically it's a kind of domain plus path. You see, so domain will be this one, and after just .com or .in or .co.in. So after this domain ends, we have something as path. Sometimes we may have path, we may not have path. And URN, uniform resource name. So basically it's a type of URI, or it's a part of URI that names a resource. Basically this is the name of the resource. Okay, correct? What I am saying that I'm giving the name of the resource, that okay, just go to the forecast folder. In that there might be a lot of cities. Just look for the Delhi city, and then just look for what will be the forecast for next 5 days. So we are we are giving the resource name here. Okay, but in most of the cases you might not get this URL. In most of the cases you might not get the URL, because nowadays instead of URL we usually use query parameters. Now what exactly query parameter is, let's come back here again. So what exactly that is? So URN, and then so if I'm saying about URN, what I'm saying is I want the detail of a user whose ID is 5. Obviously you might have not seen this kind of format anywhere, correct? Because as I told you, nowadays we don't use this. We use query parameters. So if you want the detail of a user whose ID is 5, what you can do is just use question mark, and after question mark equals to 5, something like that. You might have noticed in some of the what we say, some of the URLs. Let me check if I can get someone. So for example, let's say that API testing. So can you see that google.com search, and then we have this. Okay, let me just copy this URL actually from here, and now I'll just show you this URL here. So can you see that? Oh, okay, sorry, again let me just go back there. Yep. Okay, why it's happening, I don't know. Let me just delete some of its part, and then let's see whether it's working fine or not. So if you'll see, after this search, what is happening? This is the query parameter. Now we are not using URLs anymore. Q equals to API plus testing. Okay, so there is something Q whose value is now API testing flowchart. Correct? So this is the query parameter which and one more thing, we are going to understand about query parameter very deeply in further sessions. Let me check where I'm going to explain you. Okay, somewhere it should be there. Oh yeah, you see parameters. Basically, these are the query parameters. So we are going to understand those things as well. Okay? So this was all about URL. And what is an endpoint? So endpoint is a specific path on a server where an API resource is available. So endpoint is a specific path. Whenever I'm saying path, obviously I need to add this v1 also. Or in my case, here, if I go here, in my case here, so let's say that user equals to 5. Now look, this is the server, but and yeah, this can be the URN or requirement or whatever we say. But if you don't have this home here, obviously you don't know where to go to this server. This server is containing a lot of folder, and one of the folder name is home. So basically from here to the end, this is known as endpoint. This is the endpoint. Okay, so sometimes you have noticed that developers are changing the endpoint. So developers are basically changing this thing, the path of that particular resource or data. So I believe that we are pretty much good till here as well. And by mistake, I have added this payload here, but we are going to see about payload in the further sessions. So I think like we are good with the today's session as well. We've seen about different kind of APIs, REST APIs, SOAP APIs, GraphQL APIs, and we have also seen like what exactly an URL is and what are the different components of a URL is. So in the next sessions, we are going to start with the installation of Postman. So now everything, whatever we have seen till now, in form of in form of diagrams or theoretical part or request, response, JSON, XML, everything now we are going to do practically from tomorrow's session. So I hope that today's session was useful for you guys. Any feedback or any queries? Yeah, please, John.
So, sorry, I did not understand. Did you say that from tomorrow we are going to install Postman? Is that right?
Yeah, obviously, like right now, till now, it was a theoretical session only, correct? Like I just explained you everything about, request, response, what those things are. But practically, we also need to see how the requests are going. If I just show you, I will be downloading the Postman, will be the sending the request in practical, and we'll be getting the response in practical. We'll be also validating the response. Like, okay, are these data is correct or not in the response? Everything we are going to see from tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other queries, doubts, or we are
Um,
good to go? Yeah, Mahesh, please.
yeah, the question I have is so when you are explaining the differences between the API and web service, I kind
Mm-hmm.
of confused that the API doesn't require internet. Meaning, when
No,
you say that if the application and the client resides on the same location, then we don't need internet. Is that right? Or
obviously, if the application and no, it's not like that. Maybe like if you have two kind of applications which require the internet to communicate with each other. Okay, I'm not saying that both the applications, if the both the applications is in the same system, then it will not require the internet. It depends on your application. But the main fact is, if the internet is being used or internet is not being used, in both cases, that is an API. But if the internet is being used, okay, that is known as web service. In whole term, we used to call it as an API only.
okay, how it differs from that web service? Even in web service, if you have
Mm-hmm.
both client and application, right, and the resides in the
Mm-hmm.
same box,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't require internet as
Okay,
well.
let me show. Let me. Okay, I hope that you guys can see my screen again. Let me just do one thing. So basically, this whole thing is API, which is using internet, which can use internet, which cannot use internet. This is web service. Web service is inside the API. Web service is inside the API. Now, why we usually call this term API? Because we know that the whole thing is API. Web service is a part of that API. If the internet is being used there, we can call it web service. If the internet is not being used there, we can call it as an API. Correct?
Hmm.
You're getting my point?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that is the main difference between these two things. The only difference is API, it means internet could be there, internet could not be there. Web service, internet should always be there. Internet should always be there. So for example, if I'm logging into my Facebook account and if I'm sending the username and password and it is going to my Facebook server, obviously it's going using the internet. So
Correct.
actually we are sending the web services. We are not sending, like actually we are sending the web services, but API is very common term to use for that. Because why? Because obviously API is the main parent thing of web services. Correct?
Hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
And one more thing, for example, in our further sessions, I don't know if I have, let me check in my Postman if I have that thing currently or not. I'll just show you one thing. So I think if my screen is visible, and let me check if I have that thing right now or not. I need to just check if that thing is not there. Um, not created an example. Now you see here, this is my postman, this is the request URL which I'm sending, okay, and like I'm sending this request, and if I'm sending this request, I'm getting this response. From where this response is coming? An API is working. An API is working, but obviously this response is not coming from the internet. This response is just coming from here. This get user detail example. This response is just coming from here. If I just change it to, if I'll add, one more value here like age, and then let's say that 41, something like that. If I just save it, I just come back here. Right now it was name Rohit. Now I'll send it. Now you see, now I'm getting my age as well. From where it is coming? I'm not using any internet, correct? So it means this API is working locally without the internet. As I told you, API can work without internet and with internet. But this thing can be called as API, but this thing can never be called in web service. It is not a web services because it's not using the internet. Okay.
Understood. Thank you. And since we are here, have a quick question about this. Where is your request in this? Um, is it in the JSON
Yeah.
format or is it in the
No,
URL?
we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't have any request here because as it's a get method. You see, it's a get method. So we don't require, like usually we don't require this request body in that. Usually in get method, we can pass the query parameters here. In some cases, but in some cases you might require the request body. But in 99% of the cases for the get request, you don't require a request body. Yeah, but if there is a post request or it's a put request, then you need to have a request body here in the body section. You need to pass some body. Why? Because in post you need to upload some data or create a new record. In put you need to modify some record. Then what modification you want to do or what record you want to upload, that thing you need to mention here in the request body. Again, with the delete, the same thing is there. You don't actually require a request body. So we are going to see these things very clearly in the further sessions. Okay, this is an
Thank,
example just I shown you for the web services and API differences just for your query.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, are we good? Any queries, any doubts related to today's session? Okay, I think we are good. If there is no any other
So
raised
will you
hands.
be sharing
Yeah.
this presentation upfront or will you be sharing this at the end of our class?
Well,
The,
frankly speaking, I used to share this presentation at the end of the session. The reason being why, like in some of my sessions, the candidates have done the payments, and after payments they have asked me for this PPT that okay, we have done the payment, then there is no any issue to share this present. I have also shared them the presentation, and what happens after a few days, they stopped taking the classes because they have this master plan. They have this
hmm,
master thing with them, so they stopped taking the classes, and
mhm.
after some time 15 or 16 days later they are again joining back and they are getting confused that okay, we need to I'm having confusion in this thing, and I can't explain them that okay, I've already shown these things in my session. So if you
Yeah,
want, just after payment you can get it. It's up to you if you are sure that you will be attending all the other sessions.
yeah, sure. Thanks, understand. So yeah, that is definitely understandable. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
I'll reach out to you once I pay the fee. I'll reach out to you. Yeah.
for sure. Thank you so much. Any other queries related to today's session? Yep. I think we are good then if no doubts are there. And then tomorrow we are going to install Postman and going to jump into the real practical API testing with the request, response, and validations. So, yep, that's all for today, guys. Have a very good day and see you tomorrow.